Everything you need to know about the North Dakota legislature is right here. The Legislature Today show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, you can always catch us online. Watch the show at GreatPlainsNews.com. GreatPlainsNews.com. And watch for the recap on a cable access station near you.
This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. This hour of the Legislature Today is sponsored by the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, which serves credit unions in North Dakota and South Dakota. In the second half hour of our show, we have a couple of young legislators who are new to the North Dakota House. They're serving in their first session. We have Representative Kylie Overson, who is a Democrat from Grand Forks. She represents a district that includes the University of North Dakota, and she's a former student president of the University of North Dakota. And we also have Mr. Ben Koppelman, who is a Republican. He represents part of West Fargo, and he is rather uniquely positioned here because his father, Kim, is also a legislator. In fact, he's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Welcome, Representative Koppelman, Representative Overson.
Thanks, Dale.
Nice to be here.
First of all, I mean, this is your first session. I'll just put it to you this way. Are you sick of it yet?
Not quite yet. It's still been enjoyable. I think they condensed it enough so that everybody's ready to be done when we get there, but we're still having fun.
Well, I think it's like any race. You look forward to the goal at the end, but the goal is not just the finish. It's to make sure that we do the right policy, that we, on the House side, stick to our guns and make sure that we, conference on the proper things and make sure that we get what we need out of it when we conference at the Senate.
Representative Overson, what particular issues are you following closely as things come to an end? Because, there are certain issues in your district that are quite significant both to your district and also to the state as a whole.
Absolutely. I would think that the biggest issue right now is higher education and what's going to come of the funding model and the budgeting that we have. And we talked a little bit about the med school and the law school, but also all 11 institutions across the state and how their funding is going to play out.
And I'd like to ask both of you this. What did you think of, I don't know how you voted on the amendment, what did you think of this constitutional amendment that says instead of having a Board of Higher Education, instead of having a chancellor, we're going to have 3 full-time higher education commissioners who are going to look after the system?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I voted against it, and it's not because we know that it will threaten accreditation right now. It's because we don't know that it won't. We don't have a final word on how it is going to affect the institutions, and I think that it's dangerous to be putting that out there. I know that there's a lot of unease about the way higher education has been going, but to be putting constitutional amendments onto the ballot without certainty of what it'll do to our institutions isn't fair to the voters.
Representative Koppelman, how did you vote on that, and what did you think of it?
I voted for the measure, and I guess I have a little different perspective. I'm not scared to put constitutional measures in front of the voters as long as they're written responsibly, because I think the voters have the intelligence and the will that they can tell us what they believe. But I think just the general concept was that we needed a fresh perspective. We needed something new that we could look toward for a new solution. We all know what the old saying is about repeating the same thing over and over again. And I think that the idea that if only we hire somebody from outside of the state, it's going to fix all our problems, I think that was kind of a flawed concept. And I think this gives us a new perspective. I think if the voters go this route, I think we can have that separation between the governor and those who serve on that commission of sorts, and can have a little better accountability, not only to the people, but also to the legislature who's appropriating those funds.
Is a 3-member commission, in your judgment, the best option here, having a panel of bosses instead of one?
Well, when we sent it over from the House the first time, it was structured a lot the same, only it was a single individual.
Correct.
And I personally like the panel of 3 a little bit better. That wasn't an idea that we had floated at that point. But the idea that you're going to have 3 bosses, I think, is a little bit probably needs a little more definition than that. It's not going to be 3 individuals who are going to go around ordering everybody around how to do things individually. It's going to be the three that in the case of a board meeting or a commission meeting, they're going to say, all right, they're going to vote on what the policy is going to be, and then that's what's going to rule the day. And I've served on several boards. I was elected to the school board in West Fargo and served as school board president for a while. And even as the president, I didn't have the carte blanche authority to go into a school principal, or which might be the equivalent of a president in this scenario, and say this is the way you're going to do things, and then just get second guessed by another school board member. I mean, we had to work together to make those decisions, and then our collective decision was what ruled the day. And I think this will work a lot the same way.
Representative Overson, what do you think that a three-person board, three commissioners instead of a single person, do you think that it's preferable to have three instead of one? I mean, if we're going to change the structure?
No, I don't think so, but I don't know. I've never seen that set up. We've seen, I mean, I've also served on boards, and you have a board, and then in this case it's the chancellor. In other cases it's a CEO or a president or some person who ends up being the final decision maker. I think what would have better served this case is to have taken a further look at this instead of putting in a last-minute amendment to a constitutional proposal. And looking at what other states are doing, looking at what works well and what doesn't work, and what is most feasible in the state of North Dakota.
What is your, I'd like both of you to address this question, what is your impression of how the session is wrapping up? Do you think that there's a plan in mind, or is it a bit more chaotic than that? Representative Koppelman, you're smiling. What's on your mind here?
Well, I can't say if it's more chaotic than anything in the past, because although I'm no stranger to hanging out at the legislature from time to time, I don't know that I've spent a lot of time at this point in the session. But I do believe that each chamber has their goals on what they need out of the legislation, and I think it seems insurmountable to get through the amount of bills that are left, because you might have 10 or 12 or 15 budgets that are all hinging upon how much is the pay increase going to be for public employees, for example. Well, once that decision is hashed out between the two sides, all of a sudden you can tie up 10 or 15 bills that are pretty major spending bills. Same thing with tax reduction. Once they get an overall package and says in total tax reduction, either property tax relief or income tax cuts or whatever the case might be, here's the big package. Then they can, once they've agreed on the number, then it's probably a little easier at least to decide where it goes. And then again, now you can wrap up probably another half dozen bills. So I think we're going to see sections of bills coming through to us where it's kind of the testimony on the floor is kind of a me too to the last bill, only just in a little different context. And so I think we'll see the speed pick up, and I believe we'll have enough days, and I'm even holding out hope that we'll have a few left.
Representative Overson, what is your impression of how things are closing down? I mean, does this look organized to you?
It's tough, because we're not every one of us is in every conference committee, and we're not aware of every conversation that's going on, especially on the appropriations side, because a lot of that's going on and it's happening fast. I think it is a little chaotic right now. I think we're getting there. The biggest issues are higher education, the final tax relief packages that we have, K through 12 education, these big ticket items that we don't have the final word on where they're going. It's a little unsettling to see what's going to come within the next week, but we'll get there. We have to.
Because I'm really fascinated as to how both of you describe this to someone who calls you up and says, "What's going on?" Because that seems to me like it's a very difficult question to answer, because the process is fluid, it changes by the hour, and what its public face is may not be an accurate representation of what's actually going on. And how do you, Representative Koppelman, how do you answer someone who calls you up and says, "What's going on?" Asks a general question, or maybe asks you a specific thing about this bonehead thing that the legislature did, and maybe it's not in final form yet.
Well, I try to answer in terms of concepts, in terms of ideas, if possible, rather than an individual bill number. Because sometimes there's multiple bills that affect that concept. And so if somebody wants to call in and say, well, why isn't the legislature giving more tax relief? Well, then I can answer that in more of a general form and say, well, here's what the House has proposed, and in these two forms, here's what the Senate's proposed in these two forms. It's easier to answer my constituents in terms of subject matter rather than in terms of individual bills. So that's how I treat it.
Representative Overson, how do you deal with constituents who say, what's going on, or maybe they're upset about something. They're saying, oh, the legislature's doing this, and it's just completely misguided. But maybe it's a subject that hasn't been settled yet. But but it's hard to explain that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing when talking with the constituents, is to make sure that they know that they are heard and that we're hearing their concerns and trying to address them. And this is when it comes into teamwork. I need to make sure that I'm working with my teammates on the floor and know what they're working on, so I can be aware of the bills and the ideas and the different committees that they're working on, so I can get the quickest information and the quickest updates on specific legislation and where it's at, and try to keep track of everything.
I mean, how does the House Democratic Caucus try to keep abreast of what's going on? Because you're the minority caucus. Yep. The minority caucus, frankly, isn't privy to a lot of information that the majority caucus is.
Absolutely.
And how do you try to overcome that disadvantage?
Yep. Well, our floor leader and assistant leader try to keep in good conversation with the majority leader and assistant leader as much as possible. And then also taking that across the chamber and keeping up with what's going on in the Senate. And I mean, we're constantly communicating, sending out updates from each committee and each conference committee, and trying to stay abreast of all of the changes that are happening. It's difficult, definitely, because we're not always in those conversations. That's just the way it is when you're in the minority party, but we do our best.
Representative Koppelman, how does the majority party keep its members informed of what's going on?
Well, we have caucuses from time to time, as I think our counterparts on the other side do. Usually our caucuses are subject matter based. So, maybe it's something talking about higher ed and the funding formula. Maybe it's talking about tax cuts. Maybe it's talking about whatever. And so we do have those meetings. We don't tend to do a ton of straw polling or anything like that. It's more information. We don't try to herd our members into an individual. We don't try to whip them in line, if you might say, but we try to convince them that we need to stand together as a majority, and we need to talk through our differences so that we come out united when it matters.
Representative Koppelman, I think this is a good question to start with you on. What are the factions in the Republican caucus?
Well, some of that stuff I'm still learning the ropes on. I don't even know where I fit in all the time.
I value your perspective here, because you're a new person. You don't have preconceived notions about what's good. So you're sitting here and you're watching this group and that group and that group, and I'm sure you're observing there are factions here, and what are they, and what is it that they stand for?
Well, I think like it's probably true in both parties. You have members that on social issues tend to, you can pretty much count on them voting relatively conservative, or in our case, maybe very, very moderate. Same thing is with spending issues. You'll get to feel for individuals that are willing to spend a ton of money on education, but aren't willing to spend anything on infrastructure, or maybe anything's a little harsh, but they have their priorities that way. And I think we all have our priorities. For me, I think there's a group of conservatives that are both fiscally and socially conservative, and that's how I consider myself. And so I certainly find them to be mentors to how I do things. And I think that's how I probably group the caucus is you might have people who just fit in a few different buckets, and you tend to go in for mentoring from a certain group that seems to be either who you want to be or who you think you are. And is there a huge divide on like the majority of issues? I mean, are we split or anything like that? I don't believe we are. I think there's probably just a few issues that tend to see a few different factions. But
who are your mentors?
Well, I don't know if I should embarrass anybody. I look up to
your dad.
I was going to say, to what extent do you ignore your father? That's what I want to know.
Well, I always say, people ask, well, do you vote the same way as your dad, and do you do everything he does? And I said, we sit across the aisle from each other, not politically, just literally. And oftentimes I go almost all day, and the only time I end up having a chance to cross paths with him is at floor session, because we're on different committees. We have different specialties. And I think to answer your question on mentors, the best advice I received when I was first starting as a legislator was try to become, pick the things that you like the most, that you're knowledgeable about, and try to become an expert in 2 or 3 things. Don't try to act like you're an expert in everything, because you probably won't ever be. And so the areas that I'm on the Education Committee, I'm on the Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. So for my committee time, there was people on those committees that seemed to be knowledgeable, and I tried to learn what I could from them. As far as on the floor, when you're voting on everything, I think some representatives like Representative Ruby, Representative Casper. I would list my dad in that group, and Leader Carlson. I mean, all those guys have a lot of the same values that I do. I don't know that there's one that I specifically look toward and try to say I'm going to vote that way because that representative is. But if I'm having a conversation ahead of time to try to decide how I'm going to vote, those are the type of people that I might ask questions of.
Representative Overson, what factions are there in the House Democratic Caucus?
You know,
or do you have any? Or how would you describe it?
There's not as many factions, I don't think, in our caucus right now on either side. I think there is some more socially conservative members in both sides, and that's okay. I mean, we've, of course, seen the biggest issue this session being abortion, and that brings out a lot of different emotions and a lot of different personal beliefs on those matters. And otherwise, you know, we came in as a caucus with a set of priorities, and everyone is really stuck in line with those priorities and has worked towards those the entire session.
And who are your influences?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it would be my seatmates, Senator Schneider and Representative Mock. They are the ones who roped me into this and have been great along the way to learn from every step of the way. And they're always there to answer questions and help me understand the process and help me understand the issues that we're working on. Further, though, I think there's a number of people in both chambers. Senator Judy Lee has been someone that I've really looked up to this session. I serve on Human Services in the House side. She's the chair in the Senate Human Services Committee, and she's really, really good on these issues. She understands the importance of the issues, and she fights for what she thinks is best. So she's been a lot of fun to follow.
How did you get roped into this thing?
Well, after I had served...
Did you need a lot of convincing?
I didn't. You know, I had never had any ambition whatsoever before. I'd never been politically involved besides for higher education issues. I'd done some lobbying with student government. And after serving as student body president, I had gotten to know not only Mac and Corey in my district, but other legislators from Grand Forks and across the state. And they had approached me and asked if I was interested in running. And when I first talked to my family and talked to the law school at UND, because I knew that was hopefully somewhere in my future and made sure it would fit into my plans. And then decided it was really a good opportunity to continue some of the work I'd been doing on campus, but also to expand that to other interests that I have. And growing up in Western North Dakota, I also saw a lot of needs there that I hoped to work on once I got here.
Now, tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you from originally, and how did you kind of imply that you want to go to law school? Why is that?
Yep. I grew up in Killdeer, North Dakota, which is out in the oil patch. So, and I've been in Grand Forks, though, for about 6 years. I got 2 undergraduate degrees at UND, and then I'll be attending law school in the fall of this year. So my background, though, is social sciences and social work.
What type of law do you want to practice?
Most likely some type of family or human rights law. But in North Dakota, you can really practice many areas of law because there's a lot of different ways to be involved. I'm sure I'll end up working with the legal services in North Dakota, which works with low-income families, or within one of the departments, maybe the Department of Human Services.
Do you hope to work in Grand Forks or
Possibly.
somewhere else?
It'll depend on where the jobs are at when I finish school.
Representative Koppelman, how did you get into running for the state legislature?
Well, it probably has something to do with the influence that I had, growing up around it. I've always said, being a politician's kid is sort of like being a pastor's kid. Either you're going to embrace it or you're going to run from it. And in my case, I embraced it. I think I have a younger brother who maybe ran from it. But all seriousness, I grew up with a strong sense of civic duty. I've always felt like if you were blessed and had the ability to lead, you should. And so as a business owner, I had the flexibility to where I could run for the school board originally, served 4 years there. Toward the third year was vice president, fourth year I served as president, and really was weighing whether or not to run again. I had felt like I had done what I set out to do, and it wasn't my goal to make a career out of politics, and so I wasn't going to run for school board, and then lo and behold, the new district was formed right where I happened to be living. So if I'd had any inklings about running for the legislature prior to that, it sort of got accelerated like, well, here's your opportunity, you're going to do it or not. And so, after a few weeks of thinking about it, I decided that I would like to do that. I was, you might say, the first out of the gate in a brand new legislative district on either side, I believe, to announce that I was going to run. And, I've really enjoyed it.
What's your district like?
Well, my district represents kind of half of Fargo, or not half of Fargo, but it's made up of half Fargo area and half West Fargo area. And so it's a unique divide in city interests. It's all in the West Faro School District. It's mostly young families, at least in the growing area it is. I've got a lot of apartments in my district, so that's probably year to year changes quite a bit. But in the newer development areas, it's mostly young families.
How do you make your living, sir?
I'm a building contractor. I build homes and I do commercial renovations. Fit-ups for restaurants, daycares, just about retail, anything that's interior work. So,
how's business?
Well, business is at a standstill right now when I'm out here, but generally speaking, I've been pretty blessed. I seem to always find, enough or maybe just a little more than what I need to stay busy and make a living, and it affords me the ability to come out here.
Do you have to compete with Al Carlson?
Al and I, when I started, my career, he was kind of winding down his, I think, and he's relatively established. He owns some commercial real estate, probably still builds a few homes and some other types of residential dwellings. But he and I don't think have ever crossed paths with an individual customer.
Representative Overson, how did you become interested in a law career? For how long have you aspired to be a lawyer?
I think since I was a sophomore in high school, I've wanted to go to law school. It's just the study of law and legal field has always really interested me.
Why a sophomore in high school? Is there a particular thing that triggered this?
I think it was a John Grisham book that I read, actually.
Oh, really?
And
he makes a lot more money writing than he does being a lawyer.
Yes. Then it was
which book was it? I'm interested.
Tort
in this.
reform.
No. I think it was The Client,
okay.
And it was about a young female lawyer who's representing a teenage boy on a certain case.
Mm-hmm. And you carried it forward from there. I mean, what do you find appealing about it, other than the idea of representing folks who?
Yeah, I mean, really just the academics behind it and the understanding the history and how the law all works together. And the legislative process has been awesome for me to understand how these laws come to be. And so I've taken a couple different classes, both some social work classes that deal with legal practice, some psychology classes that interlap with the law, and just to see how the legal field works with every other section on campus.
So you're almost done with your first session. What are your overall impressions?
It's a wonderful process to be a part of. It's really a lot of fun to represent people back in Grand Forks, but also the entire state. I mean, we hear from people not only from our districts, from all over the state, and sometimes from other places in the country. And it's fun to speak to those issues and work on things that you're passionate about and get to know the people that you're working with and form coalitions and see how the process plays out.
Representative Koppelman, what are the impressions you've taken away from your first session?
Well, I think my coming into it, I knew a little more about the process and how it works as far as how a committee operates and different things like that. But I've been a little surprised in my interests. I didn't get the highly ranked committees necessarily that I requested. And looking back, I don't know if I would have chosen the same committees. And so I'm learning a little bit more how unique different committees work. And I've also learned that nothing's over till it's over in the legislative process, and you can't give up after the first go around. I tell everybody, if I knew 3 months ago what I know now, maybe a few more of my ideas would have survived. But
how do people hang together during the legislature? Is it by party or is it by age group? Or how
I would say that it's a little of both. I say it's by age group. And maybe somewhat by party, but I would say it's also by ideals. You might hang with the legislators you agree with or the legislators you're more age-related to, but I don't know if it's just strictly Republicans or Democrats.
Representative Overson, who do you?
Similar, and then I also have a lot of friends who are interns, so they're going to UND School of Law right now, so I've gotten to hang out with them, and a couple of friends who are lobbyists, so I think it's an intermingling of everybody.
That's good. We've been speaking to Representative Kylie Overson, whose voice you just heard. She's a Democrat from Grand Forks. She's a former student body president at the University of North Dakota, and she represents a district that includes the University of North Dakota. We also have been speaking to Representative Ben Koppelman, a Republican who represents part of West Fargo and part of Fargo. He represents a newly created district, and he's a building contractor in West Fargo. Thank you for your time. This is Dale Wetzel. This has been the Legislature Today radio
Spring
show.
is here. The Bismarck Mandan Civic Chorus celebrates with the music of Tom Porter.